Chapter 492. I'm very puzzled. Why is there more and more rhythm recently? Is it the first day that I started to update every day? If I remember correctly, I've already updated every day for half a year, and there were 4 months in between where I updated every 2 days. Of course, I can understand, saying that I'm slow is actually a disguised form of urging me to update. Covering face shyly, so, I want to thank everyone for their continuous support. Every comment, every monthly vote, every recommendation ticket, every tip you gave me. Actually, I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Now, let's talk about the reason for updating every day. My reason is actually very good. Because, I want to improve. From the external data, this book seems to be completely dead. But my royalties didn't decrease at all. Because of the channel bonus, if I update one more chapter every day, my monthly income will increase by at least 1 to 20,000. I'm not saying this to show off, but to prove, I'm really not writing books for money. I just want to write better. If it's to make money, then from the day this book was published, my word count skyrocketed. My annual income is at least 500,000 if not 1 million. I need to announce the results here. This book's current average order is 11,000, but the high order has reached 60,000. This 60,000 does not only refer to a single chapter, but it refers to the nearly 30 chapters that started to be published. After that, it began to plummet. 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, and now more than 1,000. It will probably continue to fall. I'm not writing well. But I did write well before I published it. Actually, I'm not very satisfied with the chapters before I published it. Because at that time, I made a lot of rookie mistakes, but I'm too lazy to change them. Then, here's the question. Why did I write so well in the beginning, but the latter part is so bad? The answer is actually very simple. Because, this is my first book that exceeds 1 million words. I can say without reservation, for more than a year, I've really put in a lot of effort. But my ability is limited. I've never had any long experience before. At most, I wrote 400,000 words. When I published it, it exceeded this number. So, I've been stumbling along the way. Once half a step to become a god. Now, it's completely dead. Can you guess how wonderful the journey of my heart is? I don't blame anyone, I don't even blame myself. Because I'm very clear, I really don't have the ability. My first book was published in 2005 at starting point. During this period, he kept writing, but he still couldn't reach the standard of signing a contract. It was only when he wrote this book that he seemed to have had an epiphany and suddenly became famous. So don't compete with me in terms of reading volume, and don't act all high and mighty in front of me. Because I really thought it was ridiculous. Let's not talk about those that we've seen before, for example, the most popular ones recently, Haunted House, Machinist, Best Friend, Best Son-in-Law. Even when the lifestyle game was just released, I could already guess that it had 10,000 subscribers when it only had 80,000 words. But, reading a book and writing a book were two different things. He had clearly thought of the plot in his head, but when he wrote it out, the flavor would always change. This was the so-called power of the brush. I had absolutely no control over what I wanted to write. This was also the main reason why many rookies couldn't even sign a contract. All this time, I've been thinking about it over and over. Think about how to improve yourself. To be honest, I've improved a lot. After all, he had been writing for so many years. His basic skills were still very solid. Now that he had the experience of 10,000 orders, if he didn't improve, then wouldn't he be a fool? But because the framework of Cultivation Dad had already been established, I couldn't express it at all. I could only continue writing according to the existing framework. Writing a book was actually like building a house. The foundation of this book was clearly the foundation of a villa, but after I built the foundation, I simply built a straw shed on top of it. Now, I didn't want to live in a straw shed. I wanted to build a villa on top of the straw shed. Then, other than tearing it down and rebuilding it, was there any other way? This was writing a book. Many people would choose to tear down the bridge and rebuild it. I was different. Since I couldn't live in a villa, I would renovate the straw shed. That was my idea. It was such a simple idea that it was somewhat inexplicable. And this was also the fundamental reason why I continued to persevere. Because I had once stood at the top of the mountain, I saw a different scenery. Now, I had fallen to the bottom of the valley. But because of that unexpected experience, I couldn't help but look at the top of the mountain. The mountain man asked me, "Do you have hatred in your heart?" I answered, "No hatred." Then he asked, "Why?" At that moment, my answer was so firm. "Thank you for letting me see the scenery at the top of the mountain. If I fell, then so be it. I'll just walk again. But the next time, I want to walk more steadily. Slower, more steadily." That was all. March 3, 2019, early morning. The west window opened. Oh, right, this isn't a eunuch's declaration. The sun will rise as usual tomorrow, the west window will be as usual, Mwax, love you guys. Chapter 493. Formation. As soon as he heard these words, Tobague was so scared that he began to tremble. He looked in the direction that Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan was pointing at and saw that a beam of light had appeared diagonally above Xianxia at some point in time. Furthermore, it was rapidly flying in their direction. From a distance, this light was like a meteor. After drawing a beautiful straight line in the sky, it directly smashed in front of everyone. Bang! Before the person arrived, the sword arrived. Sure enough, it was Qin Shi chasing after them again. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not seem to be very surprised. His face turned cold, and then he ordered everyone in a loud voice, "5 divine generals, take your positions. Activate the innate 5 direction flags and set up the heavenly cycle stars formation. Rise." As soon as this order came out, there was a small commotion on the ship. What needed to be mentioned here was, after the Battle of Dragon Head Peak, the 5 divine generals of Tiandu and the Rakshasa Star Lord had lost a lot of people, so Yuhuan Tianzuan could only temporarily choose suitable successors from the existing survivors. These people's strength was not bad, but they had not undergone systematic training, so the moment they heard Yuhuan Tianzuan's order, they seemed a little flustered. To think that our Huang Tiandu, to think that he would end up without a successor, it's really lamentable. Looking at the clumsy positioning of these divine generals and star lords, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen could not help but sigh. Hearing this, the faces of the 6 heavenly lords, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, flashed with a trace of sadness. Once upon a time, Tiandu was so glorious and strong. But now? The remnants of Tiandu, led by the 10 directions heavenly lords, had become stray dogs at this moment. In order to avoid Qin Shi's pursuit, they were in a state of panic all day long. When they were still in the solar system, the heavenly lords did not feel that there was anything wrong with escaping to the Supreme Palace enclosure. But when they really came to the Supreme Palace enclosure and saw it floating quietly in the void, the celestial venerables suddenly felt a sense of helplessness from being outlanders. Yes, Earth was their home. It was just like how Tobague's home was in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Now that he had finally returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure, he would naturally be excited. This feeling of desolation was probably the so-called, alone as a stranger in a strange land. Morale was low. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly asked Tuoba Su, "How long until the reinforcements arrive?" Hearing this, Tobague was startled. He didn't seem to understand why Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't ask him directly, but instead asked him secretly. However, doubts were just doubts. Tobague honestly replied to Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sound transmission. "The family has already given a clear reply, and the family head is on the way with people. According to my estimation, we'll be able to see the reinforcements in 30 minutes at most." "Good. Then we'll hold on for another incense stick's worth of time." Yuhuan Tianzuan nodded calmly at Tobague, then turned around and flew to the side of the high platform. He lowered his head and looked around the audience, then suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky, angrily roaring, "Hateful! Even if we abandon our home and flee to a foreign land, the thief is not willing to let us live. We have been forced into a corner. So I've decided, instead of being trampled on and humiliated like this, it's better to go all out and fight to the death with that evil thief. Yu Huan is here to ask everyone, today, are you willing to fight with me? As soon as these words came out, the audience boiled over. Before, everyone was busy running for their lives, so they couldn't raise any morale. Now that they had come to the Supreme Palace enclosure, this strange place in front of them seemed to give them infinite courage. That's right. They had even lost their home, so what was the use of keeping their lives? Where was the integrity of Tiandu? Where was the glory of Tiandu? After thinking of their last trace of dignity, everyone's fighting spirit was immediately summoned by Yu Huan Tianzuan. Fight! 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 The moment the massive heavenly cycle star formation was set up, a silver-white shield suddenly appeared around Xianxia, protecting her within. In fact, this formation was not a killing formation, but more like an auxiliary formation. Its biggest function was to connect everyone in the formation together, so that their vital essences could be intertwined and converge to achieve the purpose of glory and glory. No, the power of the formation has decreased by at least 30% after losing the central Wuji apricot yellow flag. Let me be the eye of the formation. After saying that, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen prepared to move to the lost corner. However, at this moment, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan pulled him back without batting an eyelid and then shook his head slightly. What's wrong? Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen, who had always been straightforward, was confused. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was next to him, directly pulled him to his side and softly explained to him. What? After hearing Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's explanation, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's expression was interesting. It turned out that Yu Huan Tianzuan wanted his subordinates to block the attack for him. Who did Qin Shi really want to kill? Wasn't it the Heavenly Lords present? As the leaders of Heaven Capital, the 7 of them were the real culprits that caused Earth to suffer. Since the 7 of them were no match for Qin Shi, then the best way. Obviously, they wanted their subordinates to block the attack. Now that the 7 of them were in the center of the formation, if Qin Shi wanted to successfully kill them, he had to break through the formation first. However, the formation connected everyone's lives tightly together. As the saying goes, unity is strength. If Qin Shi was determined to kill them, then he would kill everyone present first. It was just that these silly heavenly generals and starlords had been betrayed by Yu Huan Tianzuan without realizing it. Instead, they firmly believed that they were fighting for their dignity. It was just like the slogan they chanted, everything was for the prestige of the holy ancestor, everything was for the glory of Heaven Capital. With the appearance of Qin Shi, the final battle between him and Heaven Capital finally began. The remaining half of Xianxia was still flying in the universe. The fairy-like Supreme Palace enclosure was not far ahead. However, this last stretch of distance, it turned this Xianxia into a purgatory on Earth. Qin Shi attacked fiercely again and again, but the formation dissolved them into nothingness time and time again. It was true that he was a supreme. However, in such a short period of time, even a supreme was somewhat helpless in the face of such a tenacious resistance from everyone. Qin Shi was somewhat confused. What was wrong with these people? Why did they suddenly become so fearless of death? As soon as he showed himself, all sorts of magical treasures and spells would be thrown at him. He slashed at the formation's shield again and again. With every slash, the violent impact caused by the collision of true essence would be instantly dispersed to everyone. In the face of such frequent attacks, those with lower cultivation would be shaken to the point that their heart meridians would be broken and their 7 orifices would bleed. Even so, every time someone could not withstand the strong impact brought about by Qin Shi, they would immediately rush out of the formation and use their last breath to detonate their golden core, temporarily relieving some pressure on their companions behind them. The 7 celestial venerables stood on the high platform and watched everything in front of them. Although he could not bear it, Celestial Venerable Xuanzhen finally listened to Celestial Venerable Wondrous Spell's dissuasion. He stood on the high platform with the other Celestial Venerables and constantly pretended to gesture. Those who could cultivate to this level were not fools. Even ants wanted to live, so how could the celestial venerables not want to live? After all, they were the core of Heaven Capital, and at the same time, they were the future spark of Heaven Capital. As long as they could force Qin Shi to retreat and successfully enter the Supreme Palace enclosure, then Heaven Capital would usher in a new era. In the process of Xianxia flying to the Supreme Palace enclosure, the remnants of Heaven Capital fell one after another. Every time they self-destructed, it was like a festive firework, shining non-stop in this silent universe. After enduring for 3 breaths, another incense stick of time welcomed. Finally, after nearly half of the people on the ship were gone, a ray of light finally appeared in Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes. Venerable One, look. That's the Tuoba family's flag. We're saved. Chapter 494. While the remnants of Tiandu were struggling to resist Qin Shi's attack, Tubague's cry of, "We are saved," was no less exciting than a stimulant. Hearing this, Emperor Yuhuan hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction Tubague was pointing, only to see dozens of star carts flying over at an extremely fast speed. When these starships approached, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw the flag of the Tuoba family hanging high on the mast of the main ship. The flag was very exquisite and was definitely not ordinary. There were 2 words written on it, and the flag was embroidered with sea-water patterns and clouds. It seemed to imply that the Tuoba family had a long and prosperous history. The reinforcements Tubague had been waiting for, they had finally arrived. There were a total of 24 starships that came to support. When they were about to approach the location of Tubague's group, these starships immediately took the lead with the main ship, and the rest split into 2 sides and spread out in a goose formation. Looking at their momentum, there was a faint air of military formation. Seeing this, Qin Shi temporarily withdrew his true essence and then quietly floated in the void, as if he wanted to see why this group of people had come. Your Excellency is Mr. Qin. Tuoba Yi is here. Greetings, sir. After the starship stopped, a figure flew out at an extremely fast speed, and then went straight to Qin Shi. The 2 faced each other in space. Qin Shi sized up the other party, and the other party sized him up at the same time. This man who claimed to be the head of the Tuoba family had a cultivation base around the middle stage of divine transformation, which should be at the same level as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Perhaps because he knew that his cultivation base was far lower than Qin Shi, as soon as Tuoba Yi appeared, he took the initiative to respectfully greet Qin Shi. Qin Shi naturally knew why Tuoba Yi had come. Therefore, he didn't even bother to waste time with the other party. After waving his hand indifferently, Qin Shi said coldly, "Since I have chased you all the way here today, I have already made it clear that I will never let this matter go. Get out of the way. You can't stop me." After saying that, Qin Shi's figure disappeared from Tuoba Yi's sight. By the time Tuoba Yi came back to his senses, Qin Shi had already caught up with the dilapidated Xianxia in front of him and continued to demolish it. Bang! When the sword light emitted by Qin Shi once again collided with the large array, a strong wave of true essence instantly set off in the void. At that moment, the joy of seeing the reinforcements immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. Even though the Tuoba family's reinforcements had arrived, the situation didn't seem to have improved. Qin Shi was still attacking the formation. Everyone was still struggling to hold on under his attacks. Inside the array, Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others looked at the sky with stern expressions. At this point, they could only place all their hopes on Tuoba Yi. They could only hope that everything was as Tuoba Gui said, that the Tuoba family was willing to offend a supreme in exchange for the alliance of the entire Heaven Capital. Otherwise, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only use his own method to deal with the catastrophe in front of him. "Mr. Qin, can you stop and listen to me?" Qin Shi's reaction was completely out of Tuoba Yi's expectations. It was true that Qin Shi was a supreme. However, Tuoba Yi was not bad either. As the leader of the Tuoba family, Tuoba Yi represented the entire Tuoba family's will. Seeing Qin Shi's unreasonable and ruthless way of doing things, it seemed that he didn't put him in his eyes at all. Tuoba Yi's face darkened, and he had to quickly change his plan. Thus, he came in front of Qin Shi again and suddenly opened his arms, as if he wanted to stop Qianxi from continuing to attack Xianxia. You want to die? Seeing this, Qianxi did not hesitate. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed at the array again. Not to mention Tuoba Yi, even if the entire Tuoba family stood in front of him today, he would still eat Yu Huan Tianzuan alive. There was no way to talk. There was really no way to talk. Seeing that Qianxi was treating him like he didn't exist, Tuoba Yi seemed to be a little angry. Thus, Tuoba Ye's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of fierceness, and then he took out a fan-like thing from his arms. Swoosh! As soon as this magic treasure was taken out, Qianxi noticed a trace of unusual energy fluctuation from it. He originally left some leeway, intending to give Tuoba Yi a chance to stay out of this. But since Tuoba Yi was so unappreciative, then don't blame him for being merciless. Therefore, the moment Tuoba Yi took out the folding fan, the long sword in Qianxi's hands suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and then with an unparalleled power, it directly slashed at Tuoba Yi in front of him. Bang! There was no air in space, so naturally, sound couldn't be transmitted. With a flash of light, a strong shock wave with true essence as the medium suddenly spread out. Wherever the shock wave went, the meteorites immediately turned into dust and completely disappeared in this vast universe. The star Cha where the people of Tiandu were on was closest to the explosion, so the impact of this star Cha was naturally the strongest. Under such a huge impact, this star Cha was shaken and rolled quickly. After rolling for thousands of meters away, it was under the control of Tuoba Gui that the ship stabilized. Even with the protection of the array, Star Cha was blown away by the explosion. And Tuoba Yi, who took Qianxi's sword head-on, seemed to be fine. So, when the true essence Qi gradually stabilized, Tuoba Yi gently waved the folding fan in his hand, and then smiled at Qianxi with a confident face. Mr. Qin, can we have a good talk now? Hearing this, Qianxi's eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light. A mere mid-divine transformation realm cultivator could rely on this fan to block his full-strength attack, and he was not affected at all. This meant that, the folding fan in front of him should be the life treasure of a supreme being. And this supreme being was not far away. Thinking of this, Qianxi immediately closed his eyes and began to carefully observe everything around him. Supreme being. Cave void. Sure enough. Everything was as he expected. Wasn't there a tiny space crack on the Tuoba family's main ship? Humph, pretending to be mysterious. Qianxi snorted angrily. When he opened his eyes again, a golden light suddenly burst out from his eyes, shooting straight toward the crack. But the moment Qianxi's eyes shot out the golden light, a slightly old voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. Ha 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 ha, fellow Daoist, don't be angry. This old man will show himself. As soon as the voice fell, an old man with white hair and beard appeared in front of Qianxi out of thin air. And at this time, when Tuoba Yi saw the old man appear, he immediately held up the folding fan with both hands, and respectfully returned it to the old man. Tuoba Yi greets spiritual master Void Pierce stage. Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Qianxi, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yu Huan Tianzuan's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Tiandu able to withstand Qianxi's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Qianxi's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuoba Yi, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Xianxi's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Xianxi immediately understood why Tuoba Yi could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Daoist Master Chongshu's natal magic treasure. Daoist Master Chongshu himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Xianxi. Because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane, even Xianxi could not discover his existence immediately. Daoist Master Chongshu? After hearing Tuoba Ye's words, Xianxi could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, "You are not a member of Tuoba family?" Hearing this, Daoist Master Chongshu chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Xianxi's face. "My name is Master Chongshu. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven." Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Xianxi had long heard of this name from Chenghua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Xianxi immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Xianxi. Tuoba Yi was very smart, but he was also very greedy. Just like Tobagui. This was human nature. The moment Tuoba Yi received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tobagui. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Xianxi was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuoba Yi made up his mind and took the initiative to find Immortal Chongshu, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Chongshu appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Ha! Why did Immortal Chongshu come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Xianxi was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. "Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken." Before his voice fell, Xianxi turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of Immortal Chongshu. At this time, Tuoba Yi on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuoba Yi feel very proud of taking Xianxi's sword head-on just now? Therefore, Xianxi wanted to see if Tuoba Yi could still be proud now. Chi! A cold light flashed, and Tuoba Yi suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Xianxi actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Daoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, an extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Yi's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique, a sword hiding in the void. This sudden turn of events caused Daoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful void realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Xianxi had the upper hand, Immortal Chongshu had no time to rescue him. Arrogant. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Chongshu let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Xianxi. Seeing this, Xianxi smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Xianxi had no intention of fighting with Immortal Chongshu. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke. Everyone was at the insightful emptiness. Who could do anything to who? Qianxi couldn't kill Immortal Xianxia, just like how Immortal Xianxia couldn't kill him. But, although Qianxi could not do anything to Reverend Chongsu, he could completely abandon Reverend Chongsu and turn his attention to Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Xianxia made his move, Qianxi didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xianxia again and continued his forceful demolition. Pung! 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 Qianxi flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Xianxia chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of "you chase me" around Xianxia. However, the long sword in Qianxi's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no Gold Core Realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over, the Great Formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment, Tabague, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable! We have arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure." Hearing this, Yu Huan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yu Huan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop." Tabague seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Fly to where? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure, why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Qianxi was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yu Huan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State." "Then go to Central State, quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, a dilapidated large Xianxia appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xianxia seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gates formation, it directly landed in the square. Boom! With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xianxia finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. Who is it? Who dares to break into the Jade Clear Paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the Elder of Imparting Arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuaning realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xianxia in the middle of the martial arts practice field. Bang! At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shockwaves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xianxia. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the jade-clear grotto heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of jade-clear grotto heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting elder's sight. This is Tongxian, Nanhua, and Dongling? Elder technique imparting elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening, Nanhua, Dongling. If a void-pierced stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the jade-clear heavenly grotto heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the jade-clear grotto heaven was about to face a great calamity. Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xianxia's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Wasn't Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xianxia ship that suddenly fell into the jade-clear grotto heaven? Under Qin Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the jade-clear grotto heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xianxia, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Qin Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the jade-clear grotto heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerable, this Xianxia has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tobague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan with a terrified expression. One should know that just now, he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Qin Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Qin Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Qin Shi didn't even give face to Daoist Master Void Pierce stage and was determined to kill them today, Tobague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the heaven's pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Daoist Master Void Pierce stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Qin Shi wanted to chase after him. Daoist Master Void Pierce stage wanted to stop him. If Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't run, Qin Shi would kill him. If Qin Shi didn't kill him, how could the heart demon oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Daoist Master Void Pierce stage couldn't stop Qin Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tobague's question, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable? Venerable? Seeing that Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't answer, Tobague had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xianxia meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tobague was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzuan might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tobague was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Qin Shi and the 4 Daoist masters. They saw, Qin Shi stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field, facing the remains of Xianxia. The 4 Daoist masters stood in the 4 corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Qin Shi. Although Qin Shi was surrounded by the 4 Daoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face. Like a hunter who was preparing to capture his prey from a trap, even if he was surrounded, Qianxi's attention wasn't on the four Daoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Qianxi and Yuhuan Tianzuan looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the four Daoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Daoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Qianxi was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The four Daoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Qianxi just looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then at this moment, Qianxi was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Qianxi's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Qianxi was smiling. So, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Qianxi. But that smile, it obviously looked a little forced. Some choices, once made, can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Qianxi was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the four Daoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Qianxi might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Qianxi really forced Yuhuan Tianzuan into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Qianxi broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. No one knew what he was really thinking, and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Qianxi could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Qianxi take out his sword, the four perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. Two Supremes and two peak soul formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the four perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because Qianxi was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Qianxi controlled, the four perfected masters would not be able to stop Qianxi. The world was so big, where could he not go? Qianxi was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the four perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Daoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Qianxi earlier, he had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead, he persuaded Qianxi with kind words. Fellow Daoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now, you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved, but now, this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Daoist can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tian Shu ruins. Fellow Daoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my supreme palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer, okay? After a long talk, Daoist Master Chongxiu also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tiandu, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So as long as Qianxi was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Qianxi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, "Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried?" At this point, Qianxi suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, what a pity, you are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy, am I right? Qianxi's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Qianxi might care a lot about the mortals on Earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Qianxi's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Qianxi in such a brutal way, perhaps Qianxi might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Qianxi's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the 4 great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Qianxi's attitude. The 4 great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the Great Formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the Great Formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the Great Formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Chen, Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Qianxi and said, "This old man knows his mistake." Qianxi did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns. Everything in Tiandu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave, and does not dare to ask for Mr.'s forgiveness. I only hope that Mr. can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Tiandu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Tiandu battalion behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. "Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most, we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of? Right. We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Tiandu." These people in front of him were the last hope of Tiandu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd, but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then, he turned to look at Qianxi. Didn't Qianxi want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mr. can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Tiandu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yu Huan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Chen Shi's hands still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the great array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Tiandu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Chen Shi alone, in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade-clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters, and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core, from this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobague naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Chen Shi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Tiandu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Chen Shi was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor, so that the inheritance of Tiandu would not be cut off because of this. Then, Chen Shi finally cast his gaze on Daoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus, he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then, he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Chen will not disturb you all any longer. Goodbye." As soon as his voice fell, without waiting for Daoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Chen Shi had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade-clear grotto heaven. Daoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Chen Shi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort, he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Daoist cave spirit was about to move, Daoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go, today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Tiandu, everything will be handed over to Junior Brother Tongxian to deal with. Junior Brother Cave Spirit, come with me, Senior Brother has something to say to you." Chen Shi left the Supreme Palace enclosure just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Tiandu, because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Tiandu was actually because of this. The 4 Daoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end, they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Tiandu. Tiandu represented an era. An era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Chen Shi brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Chen Shi killing the remnants of the Tiandu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the 4 sages. If Chen Shi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yu Huan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All 3 parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these 3 bottom lines were not touched. Back to Chen Shi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Chen Shi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aote Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Chen Shi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Chen Shi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Qianxi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Qianxi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Qianxi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Qianxi could only use a more clever method, and that was, setting up one after another waymark in the Haute Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Qianxi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Qianxi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Haute Nebula was simply too big, by the time Qianxi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Qianxi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Qianxi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school, she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye. That cute little girl back then, she was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nian was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past. I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nian picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air, and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Ruoying hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Qianxi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nian's height had already reached 1.2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Qianxi not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuihua gate. Mom, I'm going to find Wen and Mingming to play. After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Chenghua and Yi Ji would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the three little guys running around Ho-Hai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade, or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time, there were no exquisite toys. Among the children, there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today, and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood, thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity, with the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called, "My Little Friends," in primary school Chinese. The frequency of this question appearing was second only to "The Most Unforgettable Thing" and "My Parents." Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7, or Arthur? The three little fellows strolled around Ho-Hai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the three little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Ho-Hai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Ho-Hai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Ho-Hai to swim. "Nian, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim?" Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the three of them would officially enter the 2nd grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the big cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea, and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nian was slightly excited and said to the big cat, "Big cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The big cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end. Meow. The three children were standing by the lake, and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nian's idea, after letting the big cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the big cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the big cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the big cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow. This time, the big cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nian, the big cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake. Meow. With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Xianxi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. Splash! With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. Nian Nian, look! I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Nian Nian saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold. As she spoke, Nian Nian reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. Big cat, I'm sorry, the water is so cold, I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right? After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Nian Nian began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time, they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Nian Nian, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Xianxia wasn't by her side today, Nian Nian still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. You have such a cute and sensible daughter, Mr. Chen, you're so lucky. I'm so envious. Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Qianxi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Qianxi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Nian Nian was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Qianxi didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yu Huan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Qianxi could chase after Yu Huan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could Qianxi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Qianxi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Qianxi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world, Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Wuxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zyges and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Diaoyu Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Old me had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Old me did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, old me could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yan accepted Chen Shi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Chen Shi. That was, Daoist Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yan became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju. All in all, Jiang Yan was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzuan. Ever since Jiang Yan had known Chen Shi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Chen Shi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Chen Shi, Jiang Yan immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Chen Shi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Chen Shi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yan immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yan didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan. Who didn't want to work with? Since there were benefits to following Chen Shi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Chen Shi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Jiang Yan wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Ninian. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye. The little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Ninian was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Chen Shi sent Ninian to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Ninian's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Chen, it's like this. Chen Nian's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Chen Nian skip a grade? Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the 1st grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Chen Shi had officially begun to teach Ninian cultivation. Although he only taught Ninian how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Ninian's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Ninian wouldn't be able to play with the 2 brothers anymore, and this was also the fundamental reason why Chen Shi had always been opposed to letting Ninian cultivate. It felt like he was giving Ninian a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix. Was Qianxia really different from those flirtatious B***cheese? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qianxia could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the second grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qianxia still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were two sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qianxia and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian, tell daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand what Qianxia meant. Seeing this, Qianxia patiently explained to her, the teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the second grade. You can go directly to the third grade and study with the third grade brothers and sisters. Nian, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qianxia to let Nian skip a grade. To Qianxia, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qianxia was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully, you're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Qianxia led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards, she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Qianxia saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Qianxia's mind turned, and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year, a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades, Qianxia turned around and thanked teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Qianxia, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier, taking 10,000 steps back. If your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Xianxia briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Xianxia didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Xianxia never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nianyan's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Xianxia didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Xianxia felt sorry for the little fellow, just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nianyan didn't want to disappoint Xianxia. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Xianxia with a determined face, "Dad, I want to skip grades." This time, it was Xianxia's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nianyan didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, "Nianyan, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you." As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nianyan immediately replied, "I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me." At this point, Nianyan clenched her little fist and added proudly, "This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad?" Hearing this, Xianxia instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. "Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before." "When did I? When? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense." I did. Dad is shameless." The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Xianxia. "Mr. Chen, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nianyan can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it?" Xianxia took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Xianxia knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. "Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me." Chapter 502. The little girl's 3rd grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to 2nd grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Xianxia saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of 3rd grade class 2. The form teacher of 3rd grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. "Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack." Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, teacher Li was instantly delighted. "Oh. This child is so sensible. You're called Nian, right? I like you." It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with teacher Zhang, teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into 3rd grade class 2. The 3rd-year students were basically all old foxes. After teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. "Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you, this is our new classmate, Nian. Everyone, welcome." After saying that, teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside teacher Li, looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage. She suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. Nian skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you, but her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Nian's elder brother and sister, you should, speaking up to this point, teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her." "Yes. Nian is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her." The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier, and Nian was on the tall side. Even in the 3rd grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the 3rd row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the 3rd grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just 2 people together for fun." On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Xianxi's eyes, Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. Xianxia naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Xianxia's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Xianxia's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing third-year class 2 to take a nap. Then, Xianxia nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her third-year studies had officially begun. Thieves in first grade, thieves in second grade. No one chased after the third-grade beauties. Love letters from the fourth grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the fifth grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the sixth grade. This is our class song. Once, it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then, the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time, I was in third grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Xianxia left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Xianxia had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Yinyan to school as something that she had to do every day. Yingying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Xianxia's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Ask? Hearing this, Xianxia was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the two of us, do you still need to use the word ask? Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him, and did not say anything. Seeing this, Xianxia did not feel offended at all, instead, he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Xianxia gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating, she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Xianxia. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Xianxia. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the side courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Xianxia pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Chenghua and Yiji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Shueqing. Xianxia didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Qin Shi didn't intend to interrupt them, Changhua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Chen, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Qin Shi had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Chenghua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Qin Shi's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Chenghua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Chenghua was shocked by Qin Shi's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Qin Shi and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xianyuan Chenghua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Qin Shi wouldn't agree, so Chenghua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Qin Shi eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday. So you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Shueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Shueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Qin Shi did not speak, but Chenghua was a little anxious. So, he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Chenghua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Qin Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Qin Shi's words, Chenghua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Qin Shi's character. Oh no. Mr. Chen was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Chenghua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Qin Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Qin Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Qin Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Shueqing, "Since the two of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Shueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Chenghua's face. They had known each other for so long. Qin Shi would invite the two of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Shueqing? Every day, she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Qin Shi ask for Qin Shueqing's opinion, Chenghua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Chenghua did not expect was, Qin Shueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much, but the two of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be." After speaking, Qin Shueqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that? Chenghua was in a daze. Yi blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Chenghua to visit his family. Qin Shueqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, Qin Shi could not help but smile. Then, he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Chenghua and Yi Ji were to be seen as students, then Qin Shueqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually, she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Qin Shi and Qin Shueqing's approval, Chenghua and Yi Ji could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Qin Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Shueqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Chenghua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yi Ji to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the supreme realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yi Ji did not notice the strange look on Chenghua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yi Ji stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile, "Chenghua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we?" Chenghua did not reply. Seeing this, Yi Ji was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Chenghua and continued to bewitch him. "How about the purple myrtle enclosure?" The three enclosures are like three wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the three enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So what if Mr. Chen is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the three enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yi Ji kept bewitching Chenghua. If it was the old Chenghua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Shueqing's constant hardships, Chenghua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yi Ji's incessant chatter, Chenghua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. "Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Chen, not you. What are you afraid of?" After hearing Chenghua say this, Yi Ji immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Chenghua was because he was afraid that Chenghua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yi Ji was very pleased with Chenghua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. "Chenghua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here, although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Chen is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation. So, at this point, Yi Ji deliberately paused, and then said with a determined face, "After 7 days, I will definitely be back here." After hearing Yi Ji's words, Chenghua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yi Ji felt that Chenghua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him, and then asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home?" Hearing this, Chenghua shook his head, and then muttered in a very strange tone, "Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem." "What problem?" "I'm thinking about whether Ninian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit. You see, It's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Ninian, right? But I thought about it, and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself. What does Ninian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt, these are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift, we can't take out something too shabby, right? After hearing Cheng Hua say this, Yi couldn't help but be stunned. Oh right. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Ninian. Time flew like an arrow, and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye. A month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things, and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Shueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days, and a month had already passed, but Cheng Hua and Yi still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Shueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Shueqing found Chen Shi and wanted to borrow a xingcha from him. Do you still have a xingcha? Lend it to me. Hearing this, Chen Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, What do you want to do? Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth? Seeing Qin Shueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Chen Shi suddenly laughed. I think they might be delayed by something. Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this? If they don't come back by next month, I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay? After hearing Chen Shi's promise, Qin Shueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Chen Shi really gave her a xingcha, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Cheng Hua and Yi to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Chen Shi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Cheng Hua and Yi would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Chen. Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Calm. Wonderful book house. Calm. Chapter 505. Chen Shi was certain that Cheng Hua and Yi would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Ninian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Wuxia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Ninian's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class, so what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Chen Shi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nian looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them. Quiet. Class is about to begin. It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nian, but they were afraid that Nian would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nian's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. It was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then, he gestured for Nian to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhaozhou Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nian led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nian returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized, he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nian took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Nian. Nian frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Nian, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi, heart, 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 of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Nian expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nian already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day, she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher, or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon, she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, she almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. "Dad!" As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Qinshi's arms. Seeing this, Qinshi's eyebrows suddenly twisted. "Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you." "When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily." Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Qinshi's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, "Nian, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Qinshi's mind was actually, Nian was ostracized by her classmates? After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Qinshi had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nian smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Qinshi had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, "Daddy, someone wrote me a letter." "Ah? A letter? What letter?" Suddenly hearing Nian's words, Qinshi's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. A letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Qinshi only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly, he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So, he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, "Nian, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy?" As soon as his voice fell, Qinshi pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was, the little girl who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. "It's over." Seeing the little fellow's performance, Qinshi's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit. At that moment, Qinshi even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Nian for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Qinshi firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore, he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then, he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Qinshi was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, "I tore up the letter." Torn? Qinshi was stunned. Then, he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly, "My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done. MD. He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nian was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Nian did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Qinshi was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." Xianxia was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought, he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Xianxia could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Xianxi's eyes, Nian was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now? Someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nian. Although Nian tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Xianxia was very clear in his heart, as the child continued to grow up, Nian's charm would only increase. Just like Yingying in the past, the grown-up Nian only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the four immortals, Xianxia was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Xianxia frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nian took the initiative to hug Xianxi's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Xianxia subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Nian, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know, there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Xianxia was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love? What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Xianxi's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought, he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally, they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. Nian, if, at this point, Xianxia could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed, "If you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day, and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students?" For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early, at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And, this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C, who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Xianxia tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, "No. I won't like anyone, and I won't fall in love with anyone." Hearing this, Xianxia could not help but ask, "Are you so sure?" "Why?" "Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them." Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Xianxia suddenly understood. So, she thought that her classmates were too stupid, so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends, so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Xianxia couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Muah. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Xianxia and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. "Daddy, you're so annoying." After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Xianxia's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. "Silly child, are you shy now?" After today's conversation, Xianxia finally realized, Mian Mian was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now, let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Chenghua and Yiji successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the third day after they set off. Xianxia didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Xianxia had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yiji couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Chenghua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later, they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The three great families of Ning province were the Xianyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Chenghua could be used as an example. His father was Genrio, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genrio's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genrio, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genrio had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Chenghua was Genrio's youngest child, and at the same time, his last child. Chenghua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genrio had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Chenghua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity, reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Chenghua's life wasn't good at all. Chenghua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genrio made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, first madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second madam, Madame Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Cheng Hua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Cheng Hua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Cheng Hua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son. Who asked Cheng Hua to only have one big brother left? Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genrio wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Cheng Hua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful fifth brother and eighth sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genrio didn't want to be sad, so from the day Cheng Hua was born, his fifth brother became the eldest brother, and his eighth sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Cheng Hua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the two brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Cheng Hua's eldest brother was Genyuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xian Yuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the three major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genrio's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genrio naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Cheng Hua was born, Genrio handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Cheng Hua's tragedy. Genyuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Cheng Hua was still an infant, Genyuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Cheng Hua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Jingqi. She always felt that Cheng Hua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Cheng Hua, so she didn't want Genyuan Jingqi to get close to Cheng Hua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genyuan Jingqi away from Cheng Hua. Who would have thought that when Genrio heard about this, he would only ask Genyuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact, the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore, the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Jingqi is my child, and so is Cheng Hua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Cheng Hua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Cheng Hua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genryo was one of the 8 elders in the family, and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Chenghua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Chenghua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Jianghu. Of course, Jianghu would never torture Chenghua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions, and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Chenghua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Chenghua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many hundred years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuaning in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genryo originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xian Yuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity, ever since Zhang found out that Chenghua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genryo originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Hua Er's life is uncertain, as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genryo didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chenghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day she wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto heaven alone. Then, with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chenghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genryo found it very hard to believe that Chenghua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genryo could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genryo didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now, he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genryo had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Chenghua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But, what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genryo had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genryo didn't know at all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old ragdoll in her hand. This ragdoll was personally sewn for Chenghua. It was also Chenghua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the ragdoll with her fingers as she softly muttered, "Hua, don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon, they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins." Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genryo, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genryo still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Chenghua properly. That was why he had left Chenghua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Chenghua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Chenghua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Chenghua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy, she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genryo. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Chenghua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genryo's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genryo had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. "Open the restriction. I want to see my mother." As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Chenghua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Chenghua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then with a face full of excitement, he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Chenghua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother. I'm back." When Chenghua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then, she subconsciously cried out in shock, Mother, it's me. I'm back. It's really you? Come here quickly, let Mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Chenghua up. Then, the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the Immortal Emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on Earth, Chenghua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Qinshi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Qinshi treated Ninian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Chenghua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised, but his parents won't wait. Now, he was finally back. I'm unfilial and made mother worry. It's fine, it's fine. It's good that you're back. Zhang looked at Chenghua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, Hua, didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins? This. Chenghua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So, he immediately smiled and replied, Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday. Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Chenghua directly held her arm and said with a smile, Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then, I'll tell you what happened in detail. The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang's incredulous gaze, Chenghua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple? After listening to Chenghua's story, the expression on Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Chenghua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen? Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple, he only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Chenghua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Shueqing at all, so Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Qin Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Jizun. Mr. Chen is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. Hua, you've bumped into a great opportunity. Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Chenghua had to be lucky enough to become Jizun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Chenghua's return was indeed a great thing. But, what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Chenghua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang's room. The leader was Genrio. Other than Chenghua's elder brother, Genyuan Jingqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wuwang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard. The head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Chenghua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xianyuan Wuwang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Genrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wuwang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wuwang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wuwang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Genrio immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice, "Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Chenghua go?" After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization, "Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here. The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Genrio was very impressive all day, in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was, the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wuwang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wuwang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Cheng Hua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Genrio's youngest son, Xianyuan Cheng Hua. A little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Cheng Hua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genrio had such an outstanding son. Hua, why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Cheng Hua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Cheng Hua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genrio's reminder, Cheng Hua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Cheng Hua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Cheng Hua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family, as a junior, how could Cheng Hua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genrio saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Cheng Hua for his great disrespect? Genrio was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Cheng Hua had changed. Cheng Hua had been by Qin Shi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Cheng Hua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal, it's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Shi did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Qin Shi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Cheng Hua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Qin Shi's every move affected him and Yi Ji almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Cheng Hua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Cheng Hua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xianyuan Wuwang did not know what Cheng Hua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Cheng Hua was thinking at all. Yuan Liang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xianyuan Wuwang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genrio lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Cheng Hua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Changhua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Changhua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Chen Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks? Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free, Changhua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xianyuan Wuwang replied with a look of sudden realization, "I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you too would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple." As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. "Master, you're right." Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Changhua hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Changhua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wuwang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Changhua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Changhua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment, his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. "Yuanliang, you really have a good son. This child is called Changhua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now? Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuanliang, are you willing to become my in-laws?" At that moment, Changhua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genryo could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 5:11. No. Changhua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Changhua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Changhua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Jianghu, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genryo did not urge Changhua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Chenghua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Changhua. Who would have thought that, after Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Changhua had the title of supreme disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Qin. Therefore, even if Cheng Hua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Cheng Hua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Cheng Hua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on. Since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Cheng Hua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Cheng Hua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Cheng Hua couldn't help but shudder. Then, he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, Patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind, it's just that. At this point, Cheng Hua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of 1 yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Cheng Hua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Cheng Hua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xianyuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Cheng Hua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xianyuan family could enjoy. Genrio relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So, in terms of bloodline, Cheng Hua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that the patriarch of the Xianyuan family was giving Qin Shi enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Cheng Hua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Qin that I would only be back for 7 days. So, this marriage," Cheng Hua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple." There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Cheng Hua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony, marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Cheng Hua and Yi Ji returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family, who were also the 3 major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the 2 of them and Mr. Qin. In short, it would not be wrong to please the two of them. Therefore, after the two of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the two patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the two of them, Changhua and Yiji officially set foot on the peak of their lives. It felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the two teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xian Yuan and Dongfang families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the two of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon. Boom! In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the jade clear grotto heaven? Like the great world, there were no stars near the supreme palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the supreme palace enclosure's formation was in the jade clear grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the jade clear grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble. Rumble. In an instant, the thunder rumbled, and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple. The moment Xianyuan Wuwan heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Changhua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Changhua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Changhua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then, he quietly moved to Genrio's side. Father, did something big happen? The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chenghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, "Silence." Oh, okay. Changhua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble. Rumble. The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. What's going on? Like Changhua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Changhua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Changhua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today, he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Jinren." Seeing this, Changhua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Changhua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Changhua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang, explain to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse, and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Changhua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then, he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Changhua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Changhua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Changhua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago, the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure and the Heavenly Market enclosure were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the 3 enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The 3 enclosures would meet once every 100 years, and the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the 3 enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the 3 enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts, they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Changhua knew about the 3 enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term, he could not help but interrupt Genrio and ask directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean. This Great Illusionary Land, what does it have to do with me?" Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genrio's face. He reached out and patted Chenghua's shoulder, then whispered in Chenghua's ear, "Prepare well, your opportunity is here." Chapter 513. For a junior like Changhua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genrio and even the Xianyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the three enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the three enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less joined together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the three enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time, it was also a complete planet. Every time the three enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the Great Illusionary Land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the Great Illusionary Land had real benefits. Genryo had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the Great Illusionary Land and obtained many benefits from it, then Genryo, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 great elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the Great Illusionary Land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The Great Illusionary Land did not have a college entrance examination, so the Great Illusionary Land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the Great Illusionary Land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity, the Great Illusionary Land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire Great Illusionary Land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-sized families. Moreover, besides the Ning Prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning Prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Changhua had never heard of the existence of the Great Illusionary Land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the Great Illusionary Realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the Great Illusionary Realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago, so during the distribution this time, the Xianyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xianyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xianyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. What needed to be mentioned here was, there was no requirement to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Even the Yuanying and Soul Formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one Soul Formation cultivator entered the Great Illusionary Realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000, or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the Great Illusionary Realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Changhua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Qin, the patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Qin. Although his cultivation was slightly lower, with his actual combat ability, he should not be too bad, right? However, nobody would have thought, after hearing Genrio's words, Changhua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" What? Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Chenghua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no third spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Chenghua actually wanted to give it up directly. Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate? Mr. Chen only gave me 7 days." Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Chenghua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days, I must return to Tianshu, otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words, Mr. Chen, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Chen in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? Hua, you have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the great illusionary land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Chen can give you may not be as much as what the great illusionary land can give you. When the 4 words, Great Illusionary Land, were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Chenghua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land? After hearing Genrio say this, Chenghua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Chenghua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Chen would definitely be angry. In Chenghua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 5:14. Due to the lack of time, the patriarch immediately announced the start of the great clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xian Yuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xian Yuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xian Yuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background. As long as one's cultivation was above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the Great Clan meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate, and the sky was vast. Therefore, the Great Clan meeting was actually equivalent to Wuxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Shueqing had never been to the Great Palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the Great Palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Qin Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Chenghua and Yi left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the 2nd day after Chenghua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Changhua finally signed up for the great clan meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Qin Shi. Under the constant urging of the patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Changhua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the old fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future, so the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. Why not? However, what was surprising was that, even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle, what was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Changhua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Aurus Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Aurus Core stage cultivators. Chenghua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Changhua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Changhua was still Genrio's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. The patriarch seemed to be very interested in Chenghua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Qin Shi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Chenghua's appearance, the patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Changhua was. In the arena, Changhua and the elder stood facing each other. The elder did not know Changhua, but he had learned about Chenghua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a 3rd-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Chenghua's phoenix perch scorched tail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the two sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore, the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Chenghua's identity, his 3rd-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought? After hearing his introduction, Chenghua shook his head directly, and then said calmly, I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move. At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genryo, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genryo had wronged Chenghua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Chenghua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Shueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Qin Shi. As the saying went, loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind. You are just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 5:15. Chenghua had also consulted Qin Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Qin Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Chenghua. There were 8 methods of immortals: pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance and materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Shueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Shueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Qin Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Chenghua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Shueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Shueqing, he had a discussion with Qin Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Chenghua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Qin Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the jade-clear cave heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianshu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect-guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Qin Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, there is no other reason other than the sword in your heart. Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a 9th grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a 9th grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Qin Shi smiled mysteriously and patted Chenghua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Chenghua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the phoenix perch scorched tail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Chen Shi's advice, Changhua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures? After hearing Chenghua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Changhua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor. Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move. This move is called Wave Fanyan. Please enlighten me, young master." Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyan, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat. How can he be so careless? In midair. Seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Changhua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Changhua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. Chapter 5:16. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Changhua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Shueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the three enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family head hoped that Changhua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Changhua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Changhua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Changhua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Changhua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Ida, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Chenghua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves, and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, Soon, the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom! A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough, young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again, otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that? A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use, did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xinyuan Wuang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Haha, Yuan Liang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught. It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see. Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father, he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Cheng Hua did not spend much effort and easily defeated the 2 of them.